When you lose a lot of your hair, as I have, there's pros and there's cons. A lot of cons. But one of the pros is people tend to think that whatever you say is wise, has wisdom in it. So hopefully you'll find there's a few pearls of wisdom here at the end of the evening. Happiness, right? That's the topic, happiness. Kind of corny, right? So much written about happiness, so much spoken about happiness, yet there seems to be so little of it in the world today, right? So let me ask you a question, if you don't mind. With a show of hands, how many of you would like to be happy? Hands up. Way up. Okay, cool. Second question, and this is the tough question. Please be honest. Are you in fact happy? My work here is done. I can leave right now. We can all save an hour. There's still some more wine left. We can get to it right now. Okay, that's dynamite. So I hope we'll have a wonderful discussion. I'll give you my thoughts in the next 15 minutes of what kind of makes me happy, and maybe that works for some other people. And hopefully you'll enjoy it. The secret, of course, we all learn, is when you're happy, you spread happiness wherever you go. People who are unhappy spread happiness whenever they go, okay? So we want to be in that first category, okay? So let me tell you about my grandfather, okay? My grandfather, my father's father, this is now back in the 1920s, okay? Almost 100 years ago. He was a school teacher in India, northern India. Around the 1920s, he became the headmaster of a school in a town called Jacobabad in northern Sindh in India. Jacobabad, this was the only municipal high school in that town, had about 1,000 children in that town, in that school, both Hindu and Muslim kids, and all these families coexisted very peacefully. So my granddad had a reputation for being very strict, but also very fair, very honest, and also very spiritual. So he became the headmaster of the school, and he was there for several years. Fast forward to 1942. My grandfather moved his family from this town, Jacobabad, to this city called Karachi, big city, one of the biggest cities in India at that time. By 1942, relations between the Hindu and Muslim communities in India were deteriorating. Violence between the communities was increasing. And Karachi was a largely Muslim city, and my family was Hindu, and they were there in the middle of this violence that was increasing. Fast forward 5 more years, 1947. By now, all of these worsening relations between Hindus and Muslims have reached a fever pitch. Okay? 1947 was the year when the British, who had ruled India for the prior 200 years, 1947, they divided India into these two countries called India and Pakistan. And the level of violence that accompanied that was unimaginable. So in just 6 months, just 3 months before partition, 3 months after partition, and this event was called partition because the country was being partitioned, in those 6 months, between 1 and 2 million people were killed, largely burnt alive or hacked to death. 14 million people were displaced from their homes, forced to flee as refugees, both ways, India to Pakistan, Pakistan to India. Over 100,000 women were abducted and raped. These are all, you can check Wikipedia, all of this stuff. Neighbors were slaughtering neighbors, childhood friends, became sworn enemies. So in the middle of all this, partition happened in August of 1947, and at this time, my grandfather and his family, including my parents, were still living in Karachi, now a largely Muslim city, and in what was now Pakistan, right? So it was now late August of 1947. So every evening in the streets, large mobs would go out looking for homes owned by Hindus. There weren't that many left at that stage. And they would then kill the Hindus or evict them and take over the homes. And that's the environment my grandfather and the family were living in. My parents were there at that time, along with my eldest brother. One evening, a bomb explodes. This is all true. A bomb explodes very close to my grandfather's home, 4 or 5 homes away. Giant explosion. The government of that area, Muslim government, orders a search of all the homes nearby to try and find who's involved. So my family, of course, heard this. My mother was there, my father, etc. They heard this huge explosion. They didn't know what was going on. They knew the police would be coming. And they were terrified. Hindu family, Muslim region. But there was an additional reason that they were terrified, which is that my father's younger brother, my uncle, had joined a group called the RSS, which was a Hindu group formed to protect families, Hindu families that were in that area. My father's younger brother was a member of this RSS, and they would meet and have their practice drills in an open ground, very close to my grandfather's home. And in these practice drills, they used these large wooden canes called lathis in Hindi, which can be used as weapons. In those days, there weren't guns available in those days, so things like these big wooden canes were used as weapons. Between these drills, where would they store all these canes? In my grandfather's home. So when this bomb exploded, and my family knew that the police would be coming, we had 25 or 30 of these big wooden canes stored in my grandfather's home. And they said, gee, the police find this and we're screwed. Totally done. Sure enough, later that same evening, big banging on the door. My mother tells me that all the women in the house were hiding in a closet in the back of the home. This was a small home, pitch darkness, shivering with fear, weeping, but silently, because they couldn't make any sound, because they didn't know what was going to happen. There's banging on the door. My grandfather opens the door, right? What will he do? Whole big bunch of policemen come into that home. And the police inspector who is leading the search looks around, and then he looks at my grandfather. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, he bows down and, in a gesture of respect, touches my grandfather's feet. It turned out that that police inspector had been a student in that school where my grandfather had been a teacher and a principal, had studied under him, had developed a huge amount of respect for him, and here 20 years later, he remembered that, and that's what saved my family. He called off the search, the women came out, and we survived, and that's why, seriously, I'm here this evening and able to tell you the story. So the fact that my grandfather made a difference in this student's life saved my entire family, right? In my case, that lesson from my grandfather and from other people in my family who were making a difference had some kind of impact in the back of my mind. This was way back when, and I wasn't thinking about all this consciously. So after I graduated from Carnegie Mellon, and I was looking to start my first company, I said, let me try and do something that might make a difference. At that time, hospital infections were a big issue in the US. They still are a big issue in the US. And hospital infections kill over 100,000 patients every year in the US. In that first company of mine, we developed a patented medical device for dramatically reducing this risk of hospital infection following certain specialized kinds of surgery. I thought, great, we'll make a difference and we'll build a company at the same time. Well, it didn't quite work out that way. We started the company, I raised some money, we got going. This was a teeny company, there were like 3 employees. I was this, chief salesperson, finance person, everything. This was the days before there was there was any VC money in Pittsburgh. There were very few angel investors in Pittsburgh. So we were very undercapitalized. So as I was going around trying to convince doctors to use this device that would reduce infection, I was getting a very lukewarm response. They said, yeah, it's nice, it could help, but it's very cumbersome to use. Hospital purchasing agents, who I also had to deal with, who had to order this device, also didn't see that much value, and they said, gee, why go through all this hassle of introducing a new vendor, when we're not sure what the value is. So I was scrambling, frantically flying all over the US, trying to sell this stuff to doctors and hospitals, and my company's cash reserves were dwindling every month. Net, 5 grueling, painful years later, the company went under, right? I'd been looking to make a difference, but the only difference that I'd actually made was to lose my life savings and lose a lot of other investors' money also in the bargain. So clearly, good intentions weren't enough. Good intentions weren't enough. I relearned the same lesson 30 years later. 30 years later, we're now in 2014, just 5 years ago, when I started my first nonprofit, my first community service organization, called the Wish Foundation in India. The goal of Wish is very simple: to use technology and innovation to improve primary healthcare. Now you might think, why is that a big deal, right? Primary healthcare. The fact of the matter is that just in India, one country, over 800 million people do not have access to good quality primary healthcare. And this has a devastating effect on their lives. Globally, just listen to this reality. Every year, over 6 million children under the age of 5 die. Every year, 6 million children under the age of 5 die. That's 15,000 kids a day of causes that are preventable. 1,000 women in pregnancy die every day because of complications with pregnancy and childbirth. That's preventable. India is the country where a lot of this happens. My view, when I started this nonprofit 5 years back, was that technology and innovation could make a difference in improving primary healthcare. We could develop cell phone apps to monitor patients, even remote areas. We could use telemedicine so that doctors could diagnose patients, again, in remote areas without actually physically being there. We could develop software that would help frontline health workers be more productive, be more effective. So I started Wish Foundation with that goal. Let's use technology and innovation to improve primary healthcare. Now, when I started, I knew we'd face challenges, right? How do you get personnel, medical personnel, other personnel into these remote areas, into these very poor areas, when they can make a lot more money servicing middle-class people or rich people? If you're a physician, if you're a nurse, why would you go into some hellhole when you can make 10 times the money sitting in Bombay or Delhi or wherever else? I knew we'd have those issues. When you're developing technology, I knew we'd have issues because many of the places where we were looking to serve patients didn't have electricity much of the day, didn't have internet access. So how do you use technology, right? So I knew we'd have those kinds of issues, and I said we'll figure them out. What I was not prepared for was the level of indifference and the level of corruption in the system. So what do you do when you face all of this? Very simple. You learn your lessons, stay true to your values, and you just keep at it. You just keep at it. And that was the same thing I had done 30 years back when my first company, this medical device company that I just told you about, when that went under, I tried to learn what I could from that experience, kept at it, started my second company, that did a little bit better, and then we moved on. So you kind of learn lessons, and you kind of keep at it. Now, fast forward to today, my foundation, again, it's called the Wish Foundation. Today, we're running 300 primary health clinics in the worst parts of India. We do this in partnership with government. Last year, we treated over 5 million patients with free healthcare. And the way we're growing, I'm hoping that in the next couple of years, that number will double. Our goal is that by the year 2027, which is 8 years from now, that'll be the 80th anniversary of India's independence. My goal is that by 2027, everyone in India, these 800 million people that don't have access to primary healthcare, will have that access. And hopefully, even before then, we'll be able to take our model, and again, our model is technology-enabled primary care, to various other countries before then. And we're talking to South Africa and Afghanistan and various other countries about going over there. So is all of this making a difference? I think so. I hope so. And we'll see how it goes. About a year ago, I happened to be in California visiting my elder brother, Ramesh, also a technology entrepreneur. And we were sitting and chatting one evening and talking about artificial intelligence and how AI is transforming industries left and right. And we said, isn't it interesting that so many people around the world are working on getting AI to get all of us to buy more stuff? There's so many people working on that at Google and Amazon and Facebook and everywhere else. And how few people, by contrast, around the world are working on how to use AI for social development. How do we use AI to help the bottom 2 billion people in the world? How do we improve their quality of life? How do we help them get a better education, better healthcare, etc.? So net, about a year ago, we started an AI institute in India, in Mumbai, and the idea was, it's a nonprofit, and the idea is to use AI for social development. So today, we've got about 25 top-notch AI researchers with PhDs from places like Stanford, MIT, and so on, and working on a variety of social challenges. How do you use AI to reduce the devastating effects of tuberculosis, as an example, which kills close to 2 million people every year, more than HIV and malaria combined? And there are some really interesting applications for AI potentially over there. How do you use AI to improve the crop yield of farmers in developing countries? Because regularly, every year, big chunks of their crops are wiped out by pests, which leaves them unable to pay their loans. And so there are thousands of farmers' suicides in these countries every year, starting in India. How do you use AI to develop high-risk pregnancies early in the process? Mothers who are going to be delivering, but there's a high risk. How do you detect that early so you can make the right interventions and make sure that mother and baby are healthy before, during, and after birth? So those are some of the problem areas that our researchers at our AI Institute are working on. Are we making a difference yet? No. None of this has gone in the field yet, but in the next 3, 4, 5 months, we'll be going on for pilot testing, all of these things that I've mentioned to you. And hopefully, if this starts working, we'll start making a difference. Over these years, through all of this work, first thing I've realized and that I'm learning is to be thankful. Growing up in India, I am so thankful that I had the good luck, pure accident, to be born into a good family, a middle-class family that could afford to send me to a good school. Going to that good school helped me to get into the IIT, the Indian Institute of Technology. That helped me to get into Carnegie Mellon over here. That gave me the confidence to start my companies. And here I am. How many people have such good luck, right? Doing all of this, I've also had the great fortune to meet so many people who have just totally inspired me. People who have very little, poor people, but who give their time and their energy to help others who have even less. And I just get totally blown away by that. I'm meeting people of all types, from billionaire philanthropists to global public health experts to struggling healthcare innovators to the people that we're trying to serve, which is these poor families who survive on less than 50 cents a day. And it's inspiring to watch them, how they do it. So all of that kind of teaches you. I'm learning how the lessons that we learn as entrepreneurs, starting and building a company in the US, how many of those lessons apply in trying to build a nonprofit anywhere in the world. It's very similar. the challenges, the opportunities, how to get over them. One big lesson I'm learning right now is that to achieve more, I need to do less. To focus on the few things that matter and not get lost in detail. That's always been one of my challenges. Right? So as I do all of this, I think I'm starting to see what my grandfather, the school teacher, almost 100 years ago, what he saw. Which is that when you help others, really you help yourself. You get focus in your life, you get purpose in your life. Daily, the noise of daily life, the distractions, the news, all of that affects you less. You smile more. You feel energized every day. You get a spring in your step. It's great. So, do you want to be happy? Answer is, get MAD, mad, make a difference. Thank you.